Hello and welcome to Reference King. I'm Cody, and I'm going to be talking about Drive this week. If you're unfamiliar with Drive and you'd like to watch it, or if you've seen it and you'd like to watch it again, it is currently available to stream on Netflix. If you aren't sure if it's something you'd like to watch, or if you've seen it and you're looking for similar films to watch, I'm going to list a couple that may be helpful for your various purposes now. First is Only God Forgives. It also stars Ryan Gosling and was written and directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, who directed Drive. If you did not like Only God Forgives, that does not mean you will not like Drive. If you liked Only God Forgives, it means you're pretty much guaranteed to like Drive. And if you like Drive, there's a good chance you still won't like Only God Forgives. I personally enjoy Only God Forgives more than Drive, and I will be talking about it soon. But Drive is generally the movie that more people enjoy on the whole. It's got better reviews overall. It made 8 times as much money, and everybody listens to the Drive soundtrack on repeat online. Another movie that's similar is The Place Beyond the Pines. It is not similar for its violence or crime elements or any of that stuff, really. It's mostly similar because Ryan Gosling is playing a character similar to his character in Drive, where he's a criminal with a sympathetic cause for committing his various crimes. The movie also has equally fantastic, dramatic, and romantic elements to it as Drive's first half. If you don't like Drive, but you like dramas and cop dramas and crime dramas in general, there's a good chance you'll enjoy The Place Beyond the Pines. It is currently available on Netflix. If you like Drive for its over the top violence and action sequences and set pieces, I would recommend Brawl in Cell Block 99. It is available on Amazon Prime for free. It may be available on Netflix. It was. I think it might be gone now. It stars Vince Vaughn, and if you are at all squeamish when it comes to violence, don't watch Brawl in Cell Block 99. Last but not least is Collateral by Michael Mann. Side note, I think Collateral is Michael Mann's second best movie, his first obviously being Heat. So if you like Michael Mann, watch Collateral. And if you like Drive, definitely watch Collateral. And if you like Collateral, you're probably going to like Drive. Talking about Drive feels like beating a dead horse a little bit. So I want to start with some behind the scenes stuff and where Drive came from. Director Neil Marshall, who's the director of the hit horror film The Descent, Dog Soldiers, and then the recently poorly received Hellboy 2019 remake, was attached to direct Drive. Hugh Jackman was originally set to star, and the film was going to have around $70 to $80 million budget, and it was meant to be a mid-budget competitor to the Fast and the Furious franchise. However, at some point, Neil Marshall left the project. Eventually, Hugh Jackman left the project. Ryan Gosling was brought onto the project. The film was completely reworked and rewritten by new screenwriter Hossein Amini, and the producers dropped the budget from $70 to $80 million to $14 million. Well, because the producers had decreased the budget from 70 to 80 million down to 14, the film was now incredibly low risk. They could essentially throw that $14 million away on the movie, have it be a complete flop, and it would be such a small loss to them that it didn't matter. So they went to Ryan Gosling and told him they didn't care who he got, but he could pick the director for Drive. I have never heard of this happening before or since this movie. I'm sure it has happened, and I just don't know about it. But an actor being attached to a project and then being given complete freedom to go pick the director for the project is absolutely unheard of. It's very bizarre, but it worked out fantastically well. So, Ryan Gosling is quoted as having said that he went and he watched as many films as he could from all the modern filmmakers around the world, just looking for the person that he wanted to work with on this film. And then one day he saw the movie Bronson, which was written and directed by Nicholas Winding Refn, starring Tom Hardy, also fantastic. And that after he saw Bronson, he immediately went back and watched all of Refn's, I want to say, 6 previous films leading up to Bronson, loved all of them, and immediately reached out to Refn for a meeting. About the time that Ryan Gosling was looking to get in contact with Nicholas Winding Refn, he had already flown into LA to have a meeting with Harrison Ford about making a big budget Hollywood spy film starring Harrison Ford so that he could, quote, get the chance to kill Harrison Ford. He meant in the movie, but that's how he said it. So, after Harrison Ford turned down Refn, Gosling was able to get a hold of Refn, and the two got together at a small diner to talk about Drive. Refn immediately turned Gosling down and had absolutely no interest in the project. Refn does not have a license, has never learned to drive a car, and has never attempted to, so he asked Ryan Gosling to give him a ride back to the airport so he could leave and go back to his home in Denmark where his wife and children were. On the drive back, Nicholas Winding Refn is very upset about the movie not working out with Harrison Ford, and he claims that he was sick and he had taken some Ambien or Benadryl or some sort of other medication, and it made him very dazed and, essentially providing excuses for his behavior. But he and Ryan Gosling were sitting in silence in the car. Ryan Gosling became uncomfortable, turned on the radio, and it turned on to a pop station. This caused Refn to burst into tears uncontrollably in the car, which made Ryan Gosling more uncomfortable, unsurprisingly. But then Refn turned to Ryan Gosling and said, I know what we're going to do. I know what the movie is. I know what movie we're going to make. We're going to make a movie about a man who drives around at night listening to pop music as his emotional release. And Ryan Gosling said, okay. And that was how Drive came to be. Now, both of them have stated in interviews since this story has been told that a scene of Driver driving around and listening to pop music as his emotional release never happened. That is untrue. After the opening getaway sequence, the film transitions into its opening credits sequence. The only thing that happens during this is Ryan Gosling's character, who is credited only as Driver, he does not have a name, drives around Los Angeles at night while listening to the song Night Call by artist Kavinsky. Halfway through this sequence, he returns home to his apartment. It is completely empty. He throws down a duffel bag and leaves, only to resume driving around the city to close out the opening credits sequence. This is, for all intents and purposes, the same scene that the two men agreed would be the touchstone for the film Drive. It is the main character driving around the city at night, listening to not quite pop music, but 80s synthwave as his emotional release. So I don't know why they say that scene didn't make it into the movie. It's very clearly at the beginning of the movie. I have no explanation for this. It has always puzzled me, but it's right there. Drive in general, aside from 80s synthwave, is very clearly inspired by a retro 80s action film aesthetic. But its major influence that interests me most is actually the film Risky Business. Is a feature film which features Tom Cruise's first leading role in a movie, and the infinitely parodied scene of him sliding into a room wearing just socks and a shirt and boxers and sunglasses and singing into something. But what Drive took from Risky Business was its bold, opening pink title credits. I think this is fantastic because this isn't Drive just being inspired by old 80s action movies, the same way that Tarantino is infinitely inspired by old 70s grindhouse films and just steals from all of them endlessly to make his version of 70s grindhouse films. This is a modern day drama, romance, action, thriller, crime movie, which is inspired by 80s action films and 80s coming of age rom coms with bright pink opening credit text. It's this unusual blending of genres and influences that makes Drive special to a lot of people. So, we know how Gosling and Refn became attached to the project, at least generally. So, how did everybody else get involved? Well, Bryan Cranston got involved because Refn reached out to him specifically. Refn was a very big fan of Breaking Bad, and Cranston found himself sitting in his kitchen with a notepad trying to decide what he was going to do or work on next. It was at that time that Refn called him once again, trying to convince him to be in the project. It was because of Refn's insistence and the timing of this last phone call that Bryan Cranston agreed to be in the film. An interesting note on Bryan Cranston's character is that apparently the majority of his lines were improvised during the making of the film. This makes sense because he is by far the most talkative character in the movie, and it feels like his mouth is just running endlessly in a lot of the scenes that he's in. I think he fits into the movie very well, and his dialogue feels very natural, and I'm surprised it's primarily improvised. However, he definitely feels like he fits the least upon repeat viewings. It feels like Refn really liked Bryan Cranston and put Bryan Cranston in the movie and let Bryan Cranston do whatever he wanted because he thought he was great. And Bryan Cranston did, and it worked. But it feels like Bryan Cranston doing whatever he wanted a little bit. But again, he works and is fantastic in the role. I'm a little suspicious about the claim that most of his dialogue is improvised, though. The same thing was said about Thor Ragnarok, but the screenwriters came out after this claim had been made, saying 70 to 85% of the dialogue in the movie is as it was written, which is definitely not the majority being improvisational. So I'm not sure where these claims about the majority of dialogue being improvisational come from, or if they can be trusted, but it's something I've heard about his character. The other actor who came onto the project in an interesting way is Albert Brooks. If you'll notice, Albert Brooks's eyebrows have been shaved off when he plays Mr. Rose in the film Drive. This was a decision he had made because it makes people immediately unnerving and unsettling in a way that people don't always immediately recognize. Jared Leto used this same trick for his role as Joker. It's less noticeable on Leto because of the white makeup he's wearing and the electric green hair he has, but it's the same trick being applied for the same effect. But what's interesting about how Albert Brooks became attached to the project is he had shaved his eyebrows off himself and met Refn in character as Mr. Rose in private, and as soon as he entered the room and saw Refn, he pinned Refn against a wall and started threatening him, saying that he would harm him in a variety of ways if he didn't get the role. I'm surprised that this worked on Refn. I would have assumed he would have been upset about being roughed up by the talent out of nowhere, but he absolutely loved it and gave Albert Brooks the role. The last bit of casting of note is Carey Mulligan. Carey Mulligan plays Irene, who's the mother of Benicio and the wife of Standard Gabrielle. Originally in the script, Irene was also supposed to be Latino, but Carey Mulligan had found out about the project, and apparently, similar to Ryan Gosling, she was an enormous fan of Refn's previous work. She specifically also mentioned Bronson. After finding out about the project, she, similar to how Refn got Cranston in the project, just kept calling and getting her agent to keep calling because she desperately wanted the opportunity to work with Refn. They ignored what the script said, and they hired Carey Mulligan for the part of Irene and just maintained Standard and Benicio as being Latino. I think this worked out because Carey Mulligan's performance and her chemistry off of Ryan Gosling are both absolutely fantastic, and I think she was an excellent casting choice. The primary thing that people enjoy about Drive, or at least the thing that I feel people primarily enjoy about Drive, is its aesthetic qualities. So, its visuals. Drive is shot digital with hard light and shadows, and the color saturation and contrast are bumped up just about as high as they can go for normal human standards in the post production process. This makes the visuals of the film pop significantly more than what we're used to. You can also see this done in the 2016 reboot of Ghostbusters, but that has the problem that most films have when they attempt to do this, which is if you actually just look at everybody's skin, it's pretty orange because it's oversaturated and they didn't shoot for that level of saturation correctly or balance it correctly in post production. So people look like oranges or carrots instead of people. Drive gets the balance right, though, which is excellent because it leads to a visually stunning film which looks different from just about anything else on the market, either at the time of its release or now. The reason for this type of visual style is actually because the director, Nicholas Winding Refn, has a visual impairment. He has a form of color blindness and a difficulty with visual acuity, so he makes the films as bold and contrasted as possible to make it as easy as possible for him to see his own films when editing and making them. So he can read actors' faces and tell what's happening in a scene so that he can edit it properly. The music for the film features the first collaboration between Nicholas Winding Refn and Cliff Martinez. I'm not sure who brought Cliff Martinez on in the process or when, but Cliff Martinez was already attached to the project. He was not selected by Refn. So, Refn and Cliff Martinez worked together, but they didn't have a lot of time to, so Cliff Martinez only got to make about a third to half of the soundtrack. This forced Refn to get source music for the rest of the film soundtrack. Now, while this was done out of necessity, all of the songs that Refn picked are extremely fitting for the film and pair excellently with Cliff Martinez's soundtrack. Cliff Martinez works with really relaxed, well, generally relaxed, synths and beats, which are very, very dreamy and very airy sounding. Now, if you listen to a soundtrack and Only God Forgives, it's very different from that, but that's more the exception than the rule. So the source music that Refn chose generally fits with that type of Cliff Martinez synth music. Hence, part of why he used so much synthwave music in the film, like Kavinsky, Chromatics, Electric Youth, and Desire. Desire's song, Under Your Spell, is used during the party scene when Standard Gabriel returns home from his stint in prison. The lyrics of the song are, I can't eat, I can't sleep, I can't do anything but think of you, you've got me under your spell, repeated 3 times. While that song plays during the party scene, it intercuts between Carey Mulligan and Ryan Gosling in 2 separate locations to imply that the 2 of them are thinking about each other, and it is all that they can do, even when her husband has returned home to her. Electric Youth's song, Real Human Being and a Real Hero, plays several times throughout the course of the film, but most notably at the end of it. It is the send-off which summarizes the entirety of Driver's character and our experience in watching the film. It declares that he is a real hero and a real human being, as he drives off into the night, selflessly leaving Irene and Benicio behind so that they can stay safe while he lives a life on the run or attempts to get away and start somewhere else fresh. Lastly, and my personal favorite, is the song Oh My Love by Riz Ortolani. The lyrics are, This light is not for those men. I see the sun rising from the river so that all can start again. These lyrics feel absolutely fitting from the perspective of Driver. This light is not for those men. This plays while he is spying on Nino, played by Ron Perlman. You can see the sun rising from the river so that all can start again. This part of the song plays immediately preceding the scene in which Driver drowns Nino to death in the ocean. So, sun rising from the river. This scene takes place at night and is immediately followed by a scene that takes place during the following day. And so that all can start again is because Ryan Gosling is trying to eliminate the few remaining players who can endanger Irene and Benicio so that Irene, Benicio, and Driver can all have a fresh start with Standard gone and all this criminal activity behind them. While we're on the topic of the scene in which Driver spies on and murders Nino, I want to talk about his mask. We first see this mask in the 3rd or 4th scene of the film, where after the opening getaway scene and the opening credits, we cut to Ryan Gosling from a low-angle shot looking up at him, wearing a police uniform, walking while drinking a cup of coffee. It immediately laterally dollies to the left, as he walks and reveals a film set. This shot is great because for the very beginning of the shot, with absolutely no context for his character's day-to-day life, the film is initially implying that he is a getaway driver by night, but is a police officer during the day. We then find out this is not true. He's just pretending to be a cop because it's his role as a stunt driver in a movie. It is this movie set which he steals the mask from when he goes to hunt Nino later on. A few scenes after this film on the set, Driver is spending time with Benicio and Irene after helping them carry groceries in to their apartment. It is during this scene that Benicio ducks out of the room for a moment and then returns wearing a Halloween mask of a scary pumpkin. Ryan Gosling looks at him and, slightly amused, says, "Scary." This moment with Benicio wearing the mask is critical to the latter scene in which Driver drowns Nino in the ocean. This is the only other time a character is seen wearing a mask in the film. It is completely unprompted and never brought up again. It is using the iconography of a scary pumpkin mask to connect masks in the film to the holiday of Halloween and things associated with Halloween. This is because the scene in which Driver drowns Nino, the film's genre temporarily changes to that of a slasher film. We then see Nino and his limo driver get into a limo and drive off, and Driver follow them down the road. Once they get to the ocean, Driver immediately speeds up, rams the bumper of the limo to drive it off the road, and speeds off straight down the road into the night. We then switch to Nino's perspective for the remainder of this scene, not Driver's. Nino's car is sitting on the side of the road next to a cliff. The next time we see Driver, his car is angled directly across the street from Nino's. He drives forward and smashes Nino's limo off the cliff. It is impossible for Driver's car to be there. Driver's car continued straight down the road. His car is very loud. It is a muscle car. It makes a lot of noise, and it has lights. You can shut the lights off, but people will still hear your car coming. There was no point at which Driver's car circled back around and pulled over on the other side of the road to line up and hit Nino's car. This is important because immediately after Nino's car is knocked off the cliff, we see him crawl out of the limo and look up to see Driver standing on the edge of the cliff, staring down at Nino. Nino runs down the beach to get away. He looks back, and we see Driver standing in the middle of the beach behind him, slowly walking towards him. Twice in this scene, Driver teleports, once with his car and once without it. His car goes from being down the street to being directly across from Nino's car, which is impossible, and then he goes from standing on top of the cliff to suddenly being in the middle of the beach, which is also impossible. This is meant to conjure up parallels to a trope in slasher films that occurs visually, which is slasher villains, such as Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, do not run or jog. They only ever walk at a steady and plodding pace. Whereas the main characters, who are running for their lives, run at full speed. But every time the camera cuts or rounds a corner, the slasher villain will inevitably appear in front of or directly behind the main characters, no matter how far or how fast they run. So that is what this scene is mimicking. It's also critical to note that Nino is the character whose perspective we share during this scene, not Driver. It is the only scene featuring Driver in which we're not sharing his perspective. And Nino only pants, looks back behind himself to see where the killer is, and runs for his life throughout the course of this entire scene, just like the main characters in any slasher movie. Driver then approaches Nino and drowns him. And that's it. Now, I don't think the fact that this scene is conjuring up slasher films is trying to say anything in particular, but it is very cool that you're watching a crime drama, thriller, action movie, drama, romance, that you can also tack the word slasher onto. Because for this scene, it is a slasher movie. Also, a lot of the beats in Cliff Martinez's soundtrack during this scene are synced up to the rotation of a lighthouse light that is spinning quickly nearby. to enhance the tension of the scene. It's just a nice little touch. Immediately after this, Driver calls Mr. Rose. On the phone, he says, "Have you heard the story of the scorpion and the frog? Your friend Nino didn't make it across the river." Now, if you don't know the story of the scorpion and the frog, it's very simple. One day, a frog was sitting on the beach and a scorpion approached. The scorpion asked the frog if he could sit on the frog's back while the frog swam across the river and took him to the other side, because without him, he would surely drown. The frog agreed. When the frog got halfway across the river with the scorpion on his back, the scorpion lurched forward and stung the frog in the back of the head and poisoned him. The frog said, "Why would you do this? Now we will both die." And the scorpion said, "It is my nature." At which point they both sank into the water and drowned. Two important things to note about this story. One, this story encapsulates the entire story of the film. Two, it is foreshadowing of some of Refn's problems as a storyteller to come in his future films. With Drive, you don't need to know the story of the scorpion and the frog to understand the movie. With his future films, you do need to understand other little stories and auxiliary materials in order to understand the films, like Only God Forgives. If you don't listen to a variety of his interviews, it's likely that you're not going to be able to figure out what's happening in the movie. I sure couldn't, and if I hadn't listened to his interviews, I still wouldn't have any idea what was going on in the movie. At least not the larger narrative or themes that were going on. So, this is kind of the beginning of that. It works here in Drive, but it is one of his weaknesses later on as a creator. How does the story of the scorpion and the frog apply to Drive? Well, there are videos online where people say that Driver is the scorpion. These people are wrong. They say he's the scorpion because he's wearing the scorpion jacket, and in the elevator scene, he caves that dude's head in, and he hits Cook with a hammer, and he starts getting violent halfway through. Kills Nino by drowning him in the river. Therefore, he is the scorpion drowning the frog and himself in the river. This is not the case. Driver is the frog in the story. How do we know this? Well, his car is the back of the frog, as he ferries criminals around the roads of the city like rivers. The scorpions, or criminals, sorry, the criminals always sit in the back seat of his car whenever he drives for a getaway, similar to how the scorpions always ride the frog's back. The scorpion on his jacket is also on his back. It's not on his shoulder or on his chest or somewhere else that an insignia of a house or group or individual would normally be located. It's plastered on his back. Granted, biker clubs have their insignias plastered on the back of their vests, so you could argue that he is the scorpion because it's on his jacket. I think it's more likely that he is the frog because the scorpion is on his back. The other critical piece of information is his phone call with Nino when he tries to return the $1 million. Driver just calls Nino to give him back $1 million, and then Nino refuses to take the money back and says that he, Nino, had actually stolen the money from the East Coast mob who was trying to set up a rival operation on the West Coast in Los Angeles, and that he set up a dummy robbery so that nobody could find out that he had stolen the money from the mob, and that everybody who committed the robbery had to die because they were the only people who could connect him to the robbery. So even though Driver has done absolutely nothing wrong and has tried to give back all the money, because the money is tied to the machinations of Nino, Nino is forced into a position where he must kill the driver. This to me sounds like the nature of the scorpion leading to the death of the frog, even though the frog is being nothing but helpful and trying to do what is best for the scorpion. He's trying to give the money back. He's trying to ferry him across the river, and Nino refuses and simply must stab the frog. I think this is also reinforced by Albert Brooks trying to stab Driver by surprise at the very end of the film. This again gets a little muddled because Ryan Gosling stabs him back, um, but he did it out of self defense. And again, he was giving the money to Mr. Rose at the end of the film, and totally unprompted, Mr. Rose tries to stab him. So I think it is fair to say that Driver is the frog who is perpetually being stabbed and attacked needlessly by the scorpions in the story. There's also a theory that you can go read about on Reddit, but I'll summarize it in brief here. That is the autism theory for the character Driver. People think that he doesn't talk very much, emotes very little, and connects with Benicio more than anybody because he is on the autistic spectrum and has trouble reading social situations, expressing his emotions, or understanding the emotions of others. I think this is kind of interesting, especially on repeat viewings. It's not something that would have occurred to me, but I like it as an idea. A quick note on the general structure of the movie. I think the general structure and pacing of it is what allows Drive to work so well and resonate with people. Nobody dies in the first half of Drive, maybe almost the first two-thirds of it. And I think the only violence in the first half is that Standard gets beat up by two criminals, but we don't even see that happen. Driver just finds him sitting on the ground, covered in blood, after he's already been beat up. In this first half of the movie, it takes its time establishing Driver's character about how he's a nice guy. It establishes a believable attraction and romance between him and Irene as the two just kind of quietly look at one another as they pass by each other in the hallways of their apartment building or stand next to each other in the elevator. He helps her with car trouble at the grocery store. She brings her car over to the mechanic so that he can work on it. Bryan Cranston, Shannon, realizes that there's an attraction between the two and that they're neighbors, so he offers that Driver take her home. Driver helps her out with groceries. There are all these just little things that build up over time as the two of them gradually grow closer and closer and allow their attraction to take its course. But that's pretty much what the first half of the film is. There's the getaway scene at the beginning in the opening credits scene, and those two things are, I think, pretty much there to establish what he does, as well as a promise for the audience that you're going to get things like this later on in the film if you're patient and sit through the drama and romance elements in the first half. And that's what makes the action packed second half work so well. It's that the film has taken its time, it's established all these people as being real people with real connections to one another, and then it starts violently removing them from the movie. So whenever somebody does die, you feel the impact of it. It's not just another extra wearing a mask dropping dead after you hear vague sounds of gunshots in a PG-13 blockbuster film. Death is not meaningless in Drive. It is impactful. And that's what makes it very upsetting and difficult for some people to watch. But the movie's just not for everybody, and I think that's what really makes it special. Or at least it was what made it special for me. I had never seen anything quite like it in a movie as far as violence is concerned. And I have seen things similar to it since, both in Refn's own work and in the work of S. Craig Zahler. Um, but I find it very affecting and deeply moving in a lot of ways. If it wasn't for the first half of the movie, the elevator scene wouldn't be the iconic scene that it is. It's the moment where we finally get Driver and Irene sharing one perfect moment together where he pulls her aside and kisses her. And the lighting dims and turns into tiny little spotlights along the walls of the elevator, and everything enters slow motion. And there's this beautiful, slow, airy synth sound coming from Cliff Martinez's score. And immediately afterward, slow motion ends. Ryan Gosling turns around. Nino's gangster turns to pull a gun on him, but he grabs him by the head and smashes his head into the side of the elevator. The thug goes down, and then he just grabs the bars at hip level in the elevator and uses them to steady himself as he snaps and begins to stomp the thug's skull into a bloody mess all over the floor. At this point, Irene has moved with her back to the elevator doors, and as soon as they open, she steps backwards out of the elevator in complete shock. And Ryan Gosling turns to look at her, and you can see in his eyes his regret and his hope that she'll look past what she's just seen and remember the person that she's seen and spent time with the entire time. But she's just completely taken aback and traumatized to the point where she can't move and the doors just close. It is the moment where we see the romance pay off and then fall apart immediately afterward in the most satisfying way. And in the sense where he didn't have to stomp the dude's skull apart as brutally as he did, or even stomp the dude's skull apart. He could have just knocked him out, or shot him, or this or that, or any number of things so that it wouldn't have been as traumatic for her. But the point was for us, the audience, to feel the shock and horror of him ending another person's life in the way that she did. And if he had just shot the guy, we wouldn't have felt that because we've seen that so many times. If he just knocked him out, we wouldn't have felt the horror of his actions. So the movie had to take it a step further so that we felt what she felt in that elevator. Behind the scenes trivia about the moment in the elevator. The skull crushing, right? How do they do it? Well, I don't actually know. Um, it doesn't seem like it'd be that hard because they cut away to other things and then cut back to it. So they should have just been able to rig up a dummy prosthetic for him to stomp all over. The same way that Robert Pattinson in the movie The Lighthouse from this past year had a fake seagull in hand and just smashed it to pieces against a stone wall, splattering fake blood everywhere. They should have just been able to do something similar to that. But for whatever reason, Refn couldn't figure out how they were going to do the skull stomping scene in the elevator. So he called Chilean director Gaspar Noé, who seems to either live in France or just make all but one of his movies in France, to ask him how he had accomplished the skull crushing scene in his movie Irreversible. In Irreversible, I do not know how they did the skull crushing because they do not cut away from the actor who gets knocked down to the floor. The actor gets knocked onto the floor, and then somebody grabs a fire extinguisher and just starts smashing his skull apart. So I don't know how they did that one. But in Drive, it cuts away, so they should have just been able to replace the actor with a dummy and let him stomp all over the thing. So I don't know what that was about, but whatever. It's it's interesting to go watch Irreversible and remember the elevator scene from Drive if you've seen Irreversible first. But if you've seen Irreversible, you've probably seen Drive because Irreversible's not for many people in the world, and the people who it is for have probably seen a lot of other movies before getting to that one. And if they haven't, I feel very badly for them because that movie is difficult to watch. So you can feel free to avoid that one. It's also not freely available anywhere. And even if you buy it digitally on Amazon Prime, it is in the wrong aspect ratio. It's filling the screen, but I believe it was shot in 2351, but it's presented in 16:9. So it's just cutting off the bottom of the subtitles. And I know I'm missing parts of the image, but there's no other way for me to get a copy of the film that's reasonable. The action and the violence in the movie is great. It's very minimal. So if you've seen the film a lot or more than once, for a lot of people, it can lose a lot of its impact, especially the violence against people, because only 7 people die in the movie, and they're all very memorable. But if you know that they're all coming, they don't shock you and impact you like they do upon an initial viewing. So, it's not a letdown or negative about the film, but it just doesn't hit you the same way. But I guess that's anything in life. You're always just trying to chase that feeling a good thing gave you the first time, and you can never get back to it being that good ever again. But the violence and the action is great because it's all very grounded. It's done in long held shots. It cuts away very little, so it feels like you're actually just watching something play out. And all of the car chases are shot from inside or just outside the cars at eye level. So there's no crazy shots from helicopters or drones or racing past the cars in opposite directions and cutting to a million different angles. It's just you're going to sit in the car with the camera and look out the back seat at the other car rushing up toward this car. It's going to feel as much like an actual car chase as possible. And that makes it less exciting or bombastic or awesome to people than something like Fast and the Furious. But it definitely feels a lot more genuine and hard hitting. Also, there's like no CGI in this movie other than the blood. For whatever reason, Refn always does CGI blood, similar to David Fincher. But when the cars get hit, cars are getting hit. There's no fake anything else to make it seem bigger or crazier or like the car's crumpling into a million little pieces or it's being hit with a bazooka. It's just that car ran into that car and that car fell off a cliff as a result and it fell in the sand. It's a little smoky and a little dented, but that's about it because that's what would happen because we just pushed it off a cliff and that's what happened to it. So I really appreciate that about it, the way that it's shot and the way that it's all handled very practically. There are two more scenes I want to talk about in particular. I want to talk about the pawn shop robbery and the strip club scene. The pawn shop robbery is great for reasons I didn't realize until, again, this most recent viewing. It mirrors almost exactly the events of the opening getaway scene initially. Driver pulls up, he has two passengers, they go into a building to pull off a robbery, and we, the audience and the camera, sit in the car with him and just wait for them to come out. In both scenes, one criminal comes out, he leans the shotgun seat forward, leans to open the back door, and returns to his position at the wheel. The first criminal climbs in the back and leaves the door open, waiting for the other criminal to get to the car. It is then in both scenes that after an extended wait, we see the second criminal come out of the building and approach the car. The difference is, in the first scene, the criminal gets in the car and Ryan Gosling starts to drive away. But in the pawn shop scene, Standard Gabrielle, after making it out of the building and almost all the way to the car, gets shot in the neck through a window. This is great, one, because it surprises us, because the movie set up expectations for how the scene would play out with the first getaway scene in the movie. We see him get out of the building and head towards the car, and our brain goes, oh, he's good. That's what happened with the other guy earlier in the movie, so he'll be fine. And there is nothing to warn you that Standard is about to get shot. You cannot see into the building. You cannot see through the windows of the building. You have no idea what happened in the building, who was in it, if they're armed, and nothing. Everything is telling you, oh, he's out, he's got a duffel bag, he's going to get in the car, and he's good, and we're going to go. And then just all of a sudden, one of the windows shatters, and Standard gets hit in the neck. And then a man steps out of the building and walks up behind him and just blows him away 3 or 4 times in the chest, and he hits the pavement, and the driver has to get in the car and just peel out to save himself and Blanche. The only other thing that differs in that scene is that after Blanche gets in the back seat, we see a silver car pull up next to the Mustang the driver is using. So that's supposed to kind of be our first hint that things aren't going quite according to plan, or that something's going to go wrong, or there's something shady about that other car that just pulled up. But there's nothing to indicate that Standard is going to get shot through the window out of nowhere. The initial getaway scene also establishes how Driver drives smart, not just fast. When he pulls away from the initial scene of the crime in the initial getaway scene, last thing is the strip club scene. This comes at about the halfway point in the movie, and a lot of other movies would spin their wheels, pun intended, spending time trying to figure out who Cook is or where he was or what his real name is. There would be an entire sequence where they did favors or talked to people or followed people in cars trying to find Cook. Cook's the guy who organized the dummy robbery at the pawn shop and set them all up. His real name is Chris. So this instead has a scene where Driver goes to Shannon and goes, "Yeah, I don't know, I'm looking for this guy, Cook or Chris or something." He goes, "I'll talk to Bernie." And then it just cuts to Driver just being in the strip club and walking up to a stripper. He goes, "Where's Chris?" She goes, "Over there." He goes, "Okay." And then walks in and smashes his hand with a hammer and forces him to swallow a bullet and call Nino. So here's what's great about the scene. One, he just walks in, smashes his hand, throws him on the floor, threatens him with the bullet on his forehead as if he's going to smash it into his head, uh, using the hammer to pry Cook's mouth open and put the bullet inside and then hold his mouth and nose closed, forcing him to swallow it. It's a great piece of kind of righteous and justifiable vengeance because the bullet was used to threaten a small, innocent child. So you're like, yeah, give that guy what he deserves. That's fantastic. Oh, yeah, and his stomach acid will burn through the bullet and it'll explode in his stomach. Oh, that's awesome. I've never seen that in a movie before. So, for a variety of reasons, I absolutely love that. But a great thing about his character in the scene is there are a bunch of strippers in the room. It's the changing room, staging area, makeup room for all the strippers at the club. He at no point looks at any of them. And it's interesting to me because a lot of people go, "Oh, they're kind of shocked. There's a room with like 10 or more topless women." And they're like, "Oh, I feel like the movie didn't need that." And it's like, no, but what's great about it is that he doesn't care. He's not paying attention to it. None of them are being sexualized. They're just there and they're just topless, and it doesn't get an ounce of his attention. And it's a great way to demonstrate his character and how his character cares about Irene and Benicio, and that's it. He doesn't care about the $1 million he has. He's trying to give it back. Even when he could get away with it at the end of the film, he leaves it sitting on the ground just because it causes trouble, and he was never interested in it in the first place. Whereas Shannon can't shut up about stealing the money and just keeps asking him where it is. He's not interested in women or drugs or violence or any of it. He's just trying to peacefully live his life and work on cars and drive around and meet a nice lady and raise a stepson. And I just love how this scene reinforces that he is a good person who doesn't care about all these evil or violent or carnal or greedy things like all these other bad people in the movie. It's a great way to separate him from the rest of them. And then there's the fantastic conversation between him and Nino where he says he's just going to give Nino a time and a place and give him his money back. And Nino's like, "Oh, do your partners agree?" "I don't have any partners." "You told anybody about this?" "No, just you." And Nino goes, "You're not very good at this, are you?" And Driver just hangs up. And it's just a thing of like, why would I tell anybody else? Why would I have partners? Why would I try to trick you? I'm just trying to give you your money back so that there aren't any problems. I just, because it's the line where Nino goes, "Well, so what do you get out of it?" And Driver says, "Just that, out of it." That's all he wants. He just doesn't want any trouble. The only reason he even did any of this was to protect an innocent woman and child. Like he never Cook specifically says that Driver is not going to get a cut of the robbery. Driver does not care about getting a cut of the robbery and doesn't even acknowledge the statement. He just says, yeah, only condition, I'll do the job for you, but as soon as we do the job, you stay away from Standard's wife and son forever. His debt's paid. That's all I'm doing this for. And that is legitimately his only motivation. It's so selfless that I've never seen a character do anything else like it. It's really, really, really great. I absolutely adore it about the character Driver. Because he can't even have Irene. It's not even about getting Irene or currying favor with her. She has no idea Standard's in trouble. He's never planning on telling her what he did, and he stands to gain nothing from it other than guaranteeing their safety. It doesn't get him a relationship with anybody or any money or further his career. It does nothing for him other than keep them safe. So because of this conversation and because of his treatment of and lack of attention paid to the strippers and because of the excellent moment of vengeance against Cook, I absolutely love the strip club scene. It feels like it perfectly encapsulates the entirety of Driver's character in every way that matters. And also everything that makes the film special. It's got the visuals, it's got the violence, it's got the great dialogue, and the interesting subversive characters who don't act like you'd expect in this type of heist crime movie where everybody's always trying to trick everybody else and stay alive and get away with as much money as possible. None of that's happening. I'm just trying to give you your money back, is what it's. It's really, really great. Another bit of trivia: Ryan Gosling does not do any of the driving in this movie, even though the car is driving while we see him in the driver's seat spinning the wheel. Um, the steering wheel that he's using is not actually connected to any of the machinery of the car. It does not control it. There is a stunt driver hidden in the back seat with a wheel that actually controls the car, who's driving back there, who you just don't see. They use this same method. I forget what it's called. Let's just call it a dummy wheel. But the same method was used for the movie Super 8 during the scenes where Elle Fanning is driving her father's car because she wasn't old enough to drive legally. So they just had a dude crouched in the back seat with a real steering wheel actually doing the driving. All right. Little things to wrap up. Couple great lines. Driver meets Rose for the first time, Albert Brooks, and Albert Brooks extends his hand, and Driver stares at it for a while and just says, "My hands are a little dirty." And Rose says, "So are mine." And then they shake hands. It's a it's a great moment. It's just entirely stating that they both have criminal backgrounds, but the Driver is kind of as upfront about his as he can be, and he doesn't want to stain others with his misdeeds. Whereas Rose just doesn't care and will just project his evil onto everyone and everything around him. It's also nice because Shannon goes for a handshake after Driver, and Mr. Bernie Rose just shakes his head no at him, and Shannon goes, okay, and walks away. But later, when Bernie has to kill Shannon, he does so by reaching his hand out and offering Shannon a handshake. And Shannon reluctantly accepts, and then Bernie immediately turns his hand over and slices his wrist open. Um, so I just like the kind of completion of that little mini character detail between the two of them with the "I don't respect you enough to shake your hand" and "I'm either feigning respect for you or I respect you enough because I know that I have to kill you now and you don't deserve it," and blah, 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 blah. Another great one is when Driver is talking to Irene and she asks him what he does. He says he drives for the movies. She asks if it's dangerous. And after a long pause, he says it's only part time. And the point of the line simply being he is trying to say that he is not a full time criminal. The getaway driving, the stunt driving, and all the dangerous things that he participates in, they're not him, they're not his life, they're not his career, they're not what defines him. It's just something he does on the side when he needs to. That's it for today, folks. Go ahead and check out the Reference King Facebook page and Twitter. That's what they're called. It's just at Reference King on Twitter and Reference King on Facebook. We have cover photo challenges to test everybody's movie trivia on the Facebook page. You could get your name put on the cover photo if you're the winner for that week's challenge. If nobody can guess the film of that week, then it remains a mystery, and I take it down and put up a new film's photo. And maybe I'll rotate in the ones that nobody could guess further ahead, give people a second chance in case they see it down the line and can place it later on, or in case we get new people who are familiar with the film. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about Midsommar, Midsommar. It is currently free on Amazon Prime. It is by A24. It is what's referred to as a folk horror movie. But Midsommar's fantastic and generally well liked, and it's not terrifying or incredibly grotesque. There is one scene of nudity towards the end, if that's an issue for you, and it does get kind of scary at various points, but it's mostly just very good, filled with tension, and has an interesting mystery and a very unique setting. So I would highly recommend Midsommar. If you don't feel like watching it because you just deal very poorly with spooky movies, then you can listen to me talk all about it in the next episode of the podcast. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.